Welcome to Live Daf, your online Daf Yomi Shiur.
Shalom Aleichem and welcome back to today's Daf Yomi, which is Shabbos Daf Kuf Lamed Ches, one Daf Kuf Lamed Zayin Amud Beis, 2 lines from the bottom. It says more of Chachamim Oimrim. Chachamim told us in the Mishnah one may not hang a mishameres. A mishameres is a strainer, a piece of material in which they would filter wine. Rashi says they would use it for shmarim. That's why it's called mishameres. So shmarim are the wine sediment of wine, the residue found in the bottom of a barrel of wine, that brown substance. So he has an abundance of these shmarim, which contains some liquid and some wine. So you'd like to pour the shmarim with the wine in it through this strainer, in order to get the wine to drip down, to filter out the wine from within the shmarim. So the Chacham tells us in the Mishnah he cannot even position this material over a kli. They would hang it over a kli, stretch it over a pot, a utensil, and run the shmarim through it in this manner. He can't even do that. He can't even position it. He can't even hang it up on Yom Tov or Shabbos. It says the Gemara 2 lines from the bottom, Iboilu, so they asked, Tolamai, what happens if one hangs the strainer on top of a kli? What malacha, what did he do wrong? Amar Rav Yosef, Tola Chayiv Chatas. He needs to bring a chatas because he did a malacha min ha-Torah. Amar le Abaye, what kind of malacha is this? Elamei Ata, if this is the case. So then, Tola kuza besiksa. Let's say a person would hang a kuza, some type of kli, a jug, up on a nail. Here as well, you're going to say is chayiv? Certainly not. What did he do wrong? What kind of malacha did he do? So likewise, in our case, he's simply taking a piece of material, hanging it over a kli. He certainly didn't do a malacha min ha-Torah. If anything, it's also midrabanan. It's maybe an oil aharai that he's creating, a temporary roofed area because he's creating putting a cover over the kli. So if anything, it's considered to be a temporary oil. It's also midrabanan. How can you say it's min ha-Torah? El Omer Abaye. Midrabanan he. In fact, it's only also midrabanan. Why? Shalayase kederach shu'oise b'chol. So that he shouldn't do. Chacham do not allow him to do in the same manner in which he does things during the weekday. So from Rashi, it would seem that this is a new type of isser. It's uvda d'chol. It looks like a weekday activity. It resembles perhaps an oil harai, even though it's not really an oil harai, because the space underneath it is not really open space. It's a kli. So it's a opening of a kli there. It's the space of a kli. So he's just covering a kli. It's not really considered creating a space, making an oil. It merely resembles an oil harai. It's uvda d'chol. From the Rambam, it would seem that the concern is that if he would go ahead and hang the material, perhaps he will proceed to step 2 and filter his shmarim through it, which is a malacha b'orer, certainly according to the Rabbanan. So that's the pshat in the Gemara, that we don't allow him on account of this concern. From Tosfos, it sounds like the issue here is related to oil arai. We regard this as a temporary oil, temporary roofed area, which he's forming there, and that's why it's asur. But in any case, Abaye holds the issur of hanging, of positioning this strainer on the kli, is merely an issur midrabanan. Continues the Gemara. Mankit Abaye gathered together chumri masnisa v'tani. He gathered chumri, bundles of masnisa, of halachas, which he found in various brises, v'tani, and he learned and he presented them. He made 3 categories from halachas that he found. We find this several times in Gemara, that Abaye would make lists. So he organized things for us. So what were the 3 categories? Says the Gemara like this. First thing is hagud v'amishameres kila v'kisei galan. So we have 3 categories. In one category, he's going to be doing malacha min ha-Torah and he's chayv chatas. Next category is going to be speaking about things which are merely asur midrabanan. Potter, he won't bring a chatas, but it's also midrabanan. And in the third category, it is mutar l'chatchila. There's no concern. Initially, he's allowed to do it. We're going to begin with the category asur midrabanan. The list goes as follows. Hagud. So Rashi will explain for us, this is a leather container, contains liquid. So the travelers, when they get to the place of lodging, they would open up this leather container, spread it open on top of poles, on top of pegs. So this resembles some type of roofed thing that he's doing, some type of tent, some type of oil arai, temporary oil. So it's asur. V'amishameres, that's the strainer that we just discussed. That's also asur. Kila is a canopy above a bed. So you can't construct that because that's an oil arai, a temporary roofing. V'kisei gallon. That's a certain type of chair. A gallon is a shem makam, Rashi says a name of a place. So this was a certain type, certain style of a chair, a traveling chair, which was comprised of parts, which were disassembled as they traveled, and then when they reached their location, they would go reassemble it. This he cannot use on Shabbos. Rashi says he's concerned that he might fasten those parts together tightly, perhaps those pegs and nails, which is a malacha. So this is a list of 4 different halachas, which on all of them the halacha is lo yasa, he may not do it vim asa, but if he proceeds and does, pater aval asa. So he's pater from achatas because it's not min haTorah, but it is asa midrabanan. Ahale keva, to go construct a permanent oil, a permanent roofed area, this is considered to be a malacha min haTorah. Lo yasa, you should not do it vim asa chayiv chatas. And finally we have things which are mutter. Aval mita v'kisei traskel v'asla. So Rashi will explain for us, mita is an ordinary bed, so it's standing upright or sideways, and he's merely repositioning it. So it's something which is already pre-constructed. He's not constructing, he's not creating anything. V'kisei traskel is a folding chair. V'asla is a bathroom seat. All these things, mutal and toisan lechatchila, you can go ahead and spread them out, reposition them lechatchila, because he's not creating, he's not forming any oil. He's merely relocating it and placing it in its right position. So 3 categories are as follows. We have min haTorah, an oil kva, which means actually creating a new entity. He's creating a roofed area. This is a malacha. It's creating a new concept. Whereas oil arai, something which is merely temporary, it's going to be moved along. It's not something which is going to remain in position, in place. In which case, he's not really creating a new environment. He's not making a roofed area because it's something which is merely temporary. Therefore, min haTorah is not considered to be a malacha. He didn't build anything. He didn't create anything. So he merely shielded the area temporarily. Min haTorah, it's not a malacha. Min rabbanan, it's also because it resembles an oil kvite, a permanent structure. So if we allow this, perhaps this might lead him to do a oil kva, which is a binyan. Therefore, min rabbanan, one may not construct even a temporary tent and temporary roofed area, an oil arai. The 3rd category are things which are mutter. Because the point of an oil arai being asr, although he's not really creating a new place, a new makam, an enclosed area, a roofed area, because this oil is slated to be moved further, it's not slated to stay in that position. He's not creating a new makam. Nevertheless, it's also because he is fashioning the roof, he's fashioning the tent. So he's doing something. So in the Rabban, that's awesome. However, in the case where he's simply repositioning a bed, which was upright, he's simply placing it down on its legs. In this case, both elements are lacking. Not only is he not creating a new area, a new makam, a new roofed area on this space, because this bed is temporary, it's mobile, it's portable. Not only isn't he doing that, which is a deraisa, but he's not even doing anything. He's not fashioning a roof. He's not fashioning a tent. He's not creating anything. He's merely taking something which was pre-constructed and positioning it in its place. So both elements are lacking here, and therefore it is mutter l'chatchila. Let's take a look at Rashi, who gives us the finer details of all these halachas. Rashi here begins 7 lines from the top, beginning with the word hagud. Hagud hu oyer shel behema. This is leather, tougher, sewn together, so it's a container of piv rochav moed. It has a very wide mouth. V'yesh le shnotzim, has loops in which they insert straps to close this container. V'over drachim, and travelers memalon oisa yayin echalav, they fill it with wine or milk. B'makim shetoikin shamaleim, place where they set down their tents, meaning the place where they lodge. Shetoikin shamaleim lolun v'shoitchin or v'shoichtin shoitchin oisoi, and they spread it upiv matuach al gabi yisedes. So they spread it by opening its mouth over yisedes, some type of pegs, poles. What do they do? For boruach iveres mitachtav, and the breeze passes underneath it. Umetstanen, it keeps it cool. Shlo yiskalkal yayin, so to keep it fresh. V'avedoim oil, it symbolizes, it is similar to an oil. La'achashanimtach, after it is spread out. So this is similar to an oil, but it's an oil arai. It's temporary in nature, and therefore it's only asam d'Rabbanan. Kila is this canopy sheyesh begago tefach. So Rashi stipulates that in order for it to be considered an oil, d'Rabbanan needs to have a flat roof, at least a tefach wide, which is considered to be a din of oil we find in halachos of tuma, that the minimum width of the horizontal portion, the flat portion of the roof, needs to be a tefach. Here as well, it is only concerned if this canopy has a flat roofed area, at least a tefach wide. The kisei galan kimoi mita gal nisa the kira, this bed that we discussed earlier in Nafem Mazayin, vushem makim, it's the name of a place. And their practice was that they would take apart, disassemble their beds and their chairs, they would travel with it, and they would get to the destination, they would reassemble it. Lo yasa, you shouldn't use this to oil arayninu. So referring back to the pouch and to the canopy, they are considered to be temporary oil. The kisei gal nami, this chair which is reassembled nami, that as well is a concern. There's a concern that he might fasten those parts together when he reassembles it. He might do it properly, which is considered a malacha. So if he does it, fastens it tight, there's a malacha involved. Rashi earlier says it's a malacha of makib patish because he's finishing this utensil. Therefore, there's an issa there, an issa min Torah. So therefore, don't get involved. Don't use this type of chair. Avol. This is the third category, which are mutal lechatchil, without any concern. Mita shalonu, a typical bed, hamachuberes vaymedes, which is already pre-constructed. It might say it's a kufa. If it was standing upright or mutal tzido on sideways, mutal and toisa, you can go ahead and straighten it out. Liyashval ragleh, place it on his feet. Va'afagav the hashta of it oil, even though he's creating oil, because underneath the bed is a roofed area shari. It's perfectly allowed. The loy midi of it. He's not doing anything. Lisuva ba'almi, he's simply positioning it so that it could be used, enabling its use. But he's not constructing anything. Kisei traskel, kach shemoy, this is its name. Upalaz, plush tuvili, vel yoinishel or has an upper leather. Mekaplan oisei, they folded. Ukshemesalkin oisei, when they fold it up, soimchen oisei lekoisel, they move it, they lean it against the wall. Ksheroitzi leishevalav, when he would like to sit on it, so he opens it up, and he sits on the forelegs. But asla, also traskel, it is also constructed like this folding chair. Aval ora purse, all of this leather is a bit different because it has a whole knuckle. So that as well is no problem. You can spread it out and open it up. Because it's already pre-constructed, he's not doing anything. Continues the Gemara. So the Mishnah told us that the Chacham don't allow pouring the shmarim, this residue, this sediment of wine, into the mishameresh, the strainer, which is already in place. So you can't do it on Shabbos. So they asked, what does it involve? Shimer mai. What if one filtered the shmarim through the strainer? What did he do? Amar of Kahana Shimer Chayav Chatas. He brings the Chatas because he's doing the malacha of Beirer. He's separating good from bad. So this is the sheet of the Rabban, as opposed to Rabbi Lezer holds that one may put the shmarim through the strain on Shabbos because according to him, it is not considered Beirer because it's simply happening on its own. He's pouring it through and it's getting separated on its own. There's no manipulation. He doesn't have to actually manually shake anything like somebody who's sifting flour. According to Rabbi Lezer, there's no concern of Beirer, but the Rabban hold that not only is it usher, he brings a chatas because we regard this as a malacha min Torah. So we have a contrast between Rabbi Lezer who holds it's mutal lechatchila, even on Shabbos, in contrast to the Rabbanan who hold that it is a malacha min Torah. So it's a very wide gap between the two opinions. Maskefla Rav Sheshes. Rav Sheshes challenges. How can you say according to Rabbanan it is a chatas, it is a malacha min Torah? Do we then find such a concept? Do we have such a precedent? The Rabbanon mechayvi chatos, that the Rabbanon would say this is a malacha min Torah. You bring a chatos. Rabbi Lezer shar lechatchila. Rabbi Lezer will go to the other side of the spectrum and say it doesn't even resemble a malacha. It's not even asur min Rabbanon. It is mutar lechatchila. He would totally disregard the concern of the Rabbanon. Could that be that the machlekes would range? It would be such a wide-ranging machlekes from one end of the spectrum to the other. Maskal Rav Yosef. So Rav Yosef challenged. He says, "Yeah, alam aloi, why not? We find a precedence to this. Harei Isha regarding this gold emblem of Yerushalayim. So this was a gold ornament of some sort. When one wear this on Shabbos and Shus Rabbim, we have a three-way machlekes, very wide-ranging machlekes. According to Rav Meir, it's a malacha. According to Rabbi Lezer, it's mutal chatchila. So we find a similar concept there as well. He says, if an isha wears this irsha zav outside, she brings a chatas because it is considered to be a masu, a load. Apparently, Rav Meir considers this thing to be so chashiv and so expensive and so significant that it is not regarded as an ordinary piece of jewelry. It's like a load, like she's carrying a load. Nevertheless, Rabbi Lezer says it's mutal chatchila. So we see a concept of a machlekes ranging all the way from malachim and atayra to mutal chatchila. So likewise, it is plausible in our Mishnah as well. Although Rabbi Lezer says it is mutal chatchila to strain those shmarim, there's no wonder that the Rabbanan would disagree to the point that is chayv chatas. You don't need to say that according to the Rabbanan it's only also midrabbanan, and Rabbi Lezer is just putting it down one notch. It's not midrabbanan, it's mutal chatchila. You don't need to say that. It makes sense. It is plausible to say that all the Rabbi Lezer holds that it's mutal chatchila. The Rabbanan are going all the way to the other extreme and hold that there is a isser minatur. Mahi, where do we find this discussion about the irsha zav? The Sanya is going to the price. Lo seitze isha bi irsha zav. A woman should not go out wearing this gold emblem. She shouldn't initially go out with it because it's asam d'Rabbanan. But if she does wear it, patura, she is pater. According to Rabbanan, we regard this thing as a tachshit. It's an ornament. So in Torah, there's no malacha taking place, but the Rabbanan will concern that perhaps, on account of its beauty, she'll go, remove it, display it to her friends, and end up walking, carrying it in Shus Rabbim. So they equate it like the other ornaments, tachshitim, jewelry that we discussed earlier in Masechta, that there's an issa of Rabbanan to wear them in Shus Rabbim. So we have Rav Meir, who says chayav chatas, Rabbanan, who say it's only asam ed Rabbanan, and we have Rabbi Lezer Omer, yoytze isha b'isha zav l'chatchila. An isha can actually go out wearing this thing without any concern. Rashi explains because who is accustomed to wearing this very elegant piece of jewelry? An isha chashuva, a distinguished woman, and a distinguished woman will not be tempted to remove her jewelry to display it, so there's no concern, she may wear it lichatchila. So in any case, pertaining to our Mishnah, there's no wonder that although Rabbi Lezer allows this lichatchila, the Rabbanan would say straining is a malacha. Amalei Abaye, how could you bring a right from that brisa? Mi savas Rabbi Lezer, adar Meir. Do you really think that Rabbi Lezer is referencing his words to Rabbi Meir? To Amar Chayivas Chatas? To Rabbi Meir who says that she brings a chatas, and in contrast to Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Lezer says no, it's mutal chatchila, so we find that wide gap between the two shittas. No, he's actually not referencing Rabbi Meir. Adar Rabbanan, his words are relating to the Rabbanan. The Amri Pater Val Asa. They hold that this lady is Pater. There's no malacha being performed. Aval Asa, but it's Asa the Rabbanan. V'amalu, and he responds to them. V'amalu iu mutal chatchila. And he responds and he says, no, I disagree. I say not, there's no Issa midrabbanan, it's mutal chatchila. So we don't find that Rabbi Lezer would disagree and say, well, you say it's asam in Torah, I say it's asam midrabbanan. That I say it's mutal chatchila. That's too wide of a gap. If according to Rabbanan, straining this shmarim would be considered a malachim in Torah, at least it's plausible to say, it's rational to say that according to Rabbi Lezer, he would agree that although it's not a malacha, but it resembles a malacha, it's close enough to malacha, and therefore it would be asam midrabbanan. It's more likely, says Abai, that Rabbi Lezer holds that it's mutal midrabbanan and a mutal chatchila without any concern, because Rabbanan are merely saying that's asam midrabbanan. They agree that it's not a malacha daraisa, so the gap between the two shit is not so wide ranging. So you can't bring a raya from that discussion to our discussion our Mishnah. But in any case, Rabbi Kana maintains, he holds his ground. He holds that according to Rabbi Meir, according to Rabbi Lezer, now Mishnah, it's mutal chatchila, despite the fact according to Rabbanan, is considered to be a malacha midaraisa. So let's proceed. So if it's a malacha min Torah, which malacha is he doing? Says the Gemara, Mishumai Masrinam Bey. So if they see this person straining the shmarim through this strainer, they need to give him hasra, they need to warn him, to enable the bezdin, the court, to give him a punishment. A hasra, warning is required. So on account of what do they issue a warning? What are they telling him? Don't do this because of what? Which malacha are you performing? Mishumai Masrina Bey. On account of what malacha are they going to warn him? Rabba Amma Af Mishum Bayr. Rabba Amma Mishum Bayr. Now, in the 39 Abbas Malachas, 39 primary Malachas, we find Boirer and Merakid, which are very similar in nature. They're both basically accomplishing the same thing. Boirer means sifting, means pulling out the psoilus from the food. For instance, if you have beans, kitnis, which is full of rocks and pebbles, there are lots of inedibles there, psoilus. So he goes ahead and he picks out the oichel, the food item from the psoilus, from the inedible, from the unwanted portion. So in this case, he's pulling out the food from the psoilus. This is the way he separates it. Merakid is a similar malacha, accomplishing basically the same results. It's sifting flour. So he takes his flour full of chaff, he puts it in the sifter, full of the unwanted inedibles there, and the flour makes its way through the holes. So the oichel, the food, ends up on bottom, and the psoilus, the inedible, the undesirables, remain inside the sifter. So Boirer and Merakid are very similar in nature. They both achieve same results: separation of the wanted from the unwanted, the oichel, the food, from the psoilus, from the inedibles. But the manner in which they are done is slightly different. When we have Boirer, so for instance, we're speaking about, you have lots of psoilus, lots of pebbles, lots of earth, and they're mixed up with the beans, with the kitnis. So the way to do it is to extract a small amount of kitnis from the psoilus. So he's removing the oichel and leaving the psoilus behind. So the psoilus remains on bottom. Whereas when he's sifting flour, it's happening in the reverse. The flour is trickling through, the oichel ends up on bottom, whereas the psoilus, the inedible portion, remains on top. So the results are very similar, but the manner is slightly dissimilar. So the question here is by the shmarim. So he has lots of this sediment, this residue of the wine, and he has some liquid, some wine embedded within it. He'd like to extract, separate the wine, which is the oichel, from the shmarim, which is the psoilus. So he puts it through the strainer, and what happens? So the oichel separates from the psoilus, but in which manner is it occurring? The psoilus, the inedible portion, remains up on top in the strainer. The psoilus is lamala. The oichel portion trickles through and goes to the bottom, so the oichel is lamata. So which one of these two malachis, Boirer and Merakid, should we compare it to? Now certainly it can be compared to Merakid, because in both cases, straining the wine, sifting the flour, the psoilus is going to remain back on top. So there's no question that they can warn him on account of the malacha of Merakid, because it's similar to Merakid. Can they warn him on account of the malacha of Boirer? If they tell him, well, don't sift that, don't strain that wine because you're doing a malacha of Boirer, have they done a proper asra, a proper warning? Is sifting compared to straining? Says the Gemara, we have a machlekes. Rabba Amar Mishum Boirer. Rabba holds, although they certainly can tell him that he's doing Merakid, but they can also relate what he's doing to the malacha of Boirer, which is picking the beans out of the pebbles. Rav Zera Amar Mishum Merakid. They can only warn him on account of Merakid. They can't mention the word Boirer to him. Explains the Gemara. Amar Rabba. Rabba is the one who holds that they can mention Boirer and Merakid. Says Rabba Kavasi Didim Mistaver. My opinion is more reasonable, more logical. Why? Because what difference does it make if they say Boirer, they say Merakid? They're both so similar in nature, they're meant to achieve the same results. Ma Darkel Shel Boirer. Just as the manner of Boirer, the malacha of Boirer is noitel oichel menech psoilus, he takes the food and leaves the psoilus behind. Afal chanam here as well, when he's straining the shmar, noitel oichel menech psoilus, he takes the food and leaves the psoilus, meaning he's separating one from the other. So the results are the same. Therefore, it can be equated to Boirer as well. Rab Zera, he disagrees. He says you can only equate it to Merakid, not to Boirer, because the manner, we look at the way it's done, the manner is similar to Merakid, not to Boirer. My approach is more logical. Ma Darkel Shel Merakid. Just as, what is the way, what is the manner of doing Merakid? Psoilus milamala v'oichel milamata. The psoilus remains on top. Sifting the flour goes through, and the psoilus, the inedibles, remains on top in the sifter. So the psoilus remains on top, v'oichel milamata, and the food goes down to the bottom. Af hachanami here as well. Psoilus milamala v'oichel milamata. When he strains the shmarim, what happens? The psoilus remains on top, and the food trickles down to the bottom. So it's similar to Merakid and not to Boirer. So in summary, we learned about a mishameres, a strainer. If he ties the mishameres, he hangs it onto a kli. What is he doing wrong? Abaye tells us it's only asur d'Rabbanan. If he actually strains through that strainer, Rav Kahana tells us he brings a chatas because he does he's doing a malach on Shabbos. Now, what type of warning do we issue this fellow? We can certainly tell him he's doing a malach barakid. What about bayrer? We have a machlekes, and the point of machlekes is: do we focus on the results? In which case, bayrer and mishamer straining achieve the same results, or do we focus on the manner, on the oifen, on the sequence and the way it's happening? In this case, straining is not similar to bayrer, and therefore they cannot relate it to that malach. Continues the Gemara. Tani Rami Bar Yecheskel. Talis kfula lo yaseh. A person should not hang a garment folded over. He has 4 pegs, 4 poles. He'd like to take a nap, so he puts his talis over those poles on top, and they fold over to the sides. She shouldn't do that because he's creating an oil aray, a temporary roofed area. Talis kfula lo yaseh v'im asa patar b'al asa. If he does it, it's not a malacha because it's merely a temporary thing, so he's pater, but it's asur d'Rabbanan. Continues the Gemara. There is a manner in which he can do it l'chatchila on Shabbos. Hayukaruch alea chuta meshicha. If a string or meshicha, a rope, was already wrapped on this talis, which indicates that it is slated for spreading, for opening up, it has this thing attached to it, mutal and tois l'chatchila, then he can go ahead and spread it l'chatchila on Shabbos. Rashi explains because he's simply adding to an oil aray, to a temporary structure, and therefore there's no isser at all. So the chuta meshicha here are indicative of the fact that this is meant to be open and closed. So when he opens it, he's simply adjusting this oil aray. He's not creating something anew. He's merely opening it and spreading a pre-existing oil aray, in which case there's no isser d'Rabbanan. The point of an oil aray being asur is because he's fashioning an oil aray. He's creating something, but if this oil is already pre-existing, the fact is there's a string there which indicates that it's meant to be opened and closed. So he's simply making use of it, but he's not creating it, therefore it's mutter. Boy minei Rav Kahana me Rav. So Rav Kahana asked the following question of Rav. Kila mao, may one spread a bed canopy? Amalei responded, af mita asura. Sometimes even using a bed is asur. It's a bit cryptic. The Gemara will explain. Mita mao. So Rav Kahana followed up with the next question. Okay, so all beds are asur? Amalei af kila muter. Sometimes even a canopy would be muter. Kilo mita mao says okay. So it seems like kilo mita are meant to be put together. Do you mean to say that whenever this type of kilo would be asur, this type of mita would be asur, whenever a certain type of canopy would be mutter, the bed which has a similar property would also be mutter, meaning mita and kilo are meant to be put together in the same category? Amalei said no, kilo asura. Sometimes you have a canopy in which it is asur to construct it, umitu muteris, and to position a bed would be mutter. So it seems to be a bit of a cryptic response, and the Gemara will explain exactly what he meant. V'loi kash is not difficult. Ha deka amar af mita asura. Initially when he responded, he said, there's a certain type of bed, which positioning that bed involves an isser. Kedekar menoi, speaking about using this beds we discussed earlier, the travelers, Rashi says this is the same Galilanisa, this bed that's made of parts, and there's a concern if he uses it and reassembles those parts, he might go ahead and fasten them in a manner which involves a malacha. So you cannot use this, you cannot go ahead and put this thing together on Shabbos. So that's the mita asura. When he responded that there's even a certain type of canopy which one may go ahead and spread out on Shabbos, he was speaking about the one mentioned earlier with the rope, with the string attached to it, in which case he's not fashioning a new oil, he's simply spreading out an oil aray. He's being moistive of oil aray, he's adding to a pre-existing oil aray. So in this case, there's no concern. When he concluded and he said, Kilo asuro mitum teres, that sometimes a canopy is also to spread, and a bed one may go ahead and position on Shabbos. Kedididani, speaking about ours, a typical canopy, which involves an isser d'Rabbanan. If he goes and spreads his canopy, he's fashioning a temporary oil, a temporary tent, roofed area. So therefore it's asur. Umito muteres is speaking about a simple bed, a pre-constructed bed, which is standing upright, and he's going ahead and he's positioning it properly on the floor, in which case, as we discussed earlier, there's no concern, because he's merely repositioning, relocating a pre-existing, a pre-constructed item. Continues the Gemara, Amar Rav Yosef, Chazinu lo lekilot ve'Rav Huna. I noticed those canopies in the home of Rav Huna, the me'urta, Shabbos at night, in the evening, negidu, they were spread out, mitzafra. And in the morning, I noticed chavita ramya, they were thrown on the floor. So apparently, that type of canopy was okay. Now, Tosfos learns we were speaking about a canopy that has a string or rope attached to it, in which case, just as he can go ahead and spread it out without any concern, he can go ahead and collapse it as well. Amar Rav Mishum Rav Chia, Viloin, a curtain spread over a doorway, mutal and toisle, one may go ahead and hang it up, mutal farka, you can go collapse it. Rashi explains, there's no concern of oil. It's not oil, it's not a roof. It's not covering, it's merely going vertically. It's a mechitza. Therefore, this is not considered to be an oil, even an oil aray, and it's mutter on Shabbos. V'amar Shmuel Mishum Rav Chia, kilas chasanim, this unique type of canopy called kilas chasanim, used for groom, mutal and toisa, mutal farka, one can spread it out on Shabbos and collapse it as well. And the point here is, since it does not have a flat roofed area, which is a tefach wide, which is the minimum requirement for it to be considered oil, so even an oil aray, we don't consider this. So it's coming to a roof, a point, an apex, and there's no flat, there's no width, there's no surface of tefach, therefore it has no din oil at all. As opposed to the canopies discussed earlier, which evidently have a gag tefach, a flat roofed area which is a tefach wide, in which case is regarded as an oil. So again, this kilas chasanim is mutter because it's coming to a point. And the Gemara will describe how it's coming to a point. Omar Rav Sheshes v'Ravidi lo yamaran. This allowance is only said ela she'en begag tefach. It's only if in the gag, in the roof, there's no tefach wide, al yesh begag tefach. But if it has a flat roof which is a tefach wide, asura. V'chi ein begag tefach. And even when it does not have a width of a tefach at the apex, at the tip, nami lo yamaran. And there's also only mutter ela she'en b'pachas mishloisha. Samach legag tefach. If within 3 tefachim to the apex, to the point, if within 3 tefachim, the canopy does not have a width of a tefach, only then it's mutter. Because if, even within 3 tefachim to the tip, it widens a tefach, and we know the halacha of lavud, anything between 3 tefachim is regarded as one and the same, as connected, so that width of a tefach, anywhere within 3 tefachim, would be regarded as the roof area, as the gag, and therefore it's a problem. Aval yesh b'fachos mishloisha, but within 3 tefachim to the point, samach lagaga would have a tefach, then it's also. V'lo yamaran, and likewise, this allowance is only said elo she'ein b'shipua tefach, if the slant does not contain a width of a tefach. Meaning, so this is the canopy. Apparently it was a very narrow canopy. So this is the shipua. Now, if this shipua, if this slants outward a tefach, then there's a problem. Meaning, we look at the midpoint, this is the canopy, we look at the midpoint, and the slant going this way, if it slants outward a tefach, meaning all the way on the bottom, if it's a tefach away from the midpoint, then this whole thing is regarded like a roof, like a gag tefach. V'lo yamaran ela she'en b'shipua tefach. This is only said when the slant does not have a tefach. Aval yesh b'shipua tefach. But the slant widens a tefach, then it's considered to be an oil, even though it's going in a slant. Shipui aholim, slants of aholim, of tents, ki aholim dami, are regarded as tents. And Rashi points out, obviously, this canopy was not intended for sleeping in it. Now, Tosfos has a different approach. He says that we're speaking of a wide canopy, but what the Gemara means that there's no width, the slant doesn't have a width of a tefach, it means all the way on top. So it has a wide canopy, and on top, it's a zigzag. So it goes like this. And the Gemara merely means that on the top, each zigzag, each angle of that zigzag does not have a width of a tefach. So that's what it means, that each one of those points in the middle doesn't widen a tefach from its midpoint. And therefore, there's no oil taking place here. And finally says the Gemara, there's one more condition. This is only said, this allowance by the kilas chasanim is only el deloy nochis mipuya tefach. Only if the canopy doesn't drop down from the sides of the bed, underneath the bed, a tefach down. It doesn't drag down a tefach. Aval nachas mipuya tefach. But if it drops below the bed, a tefach. Asr. Why? Because although the top of the area is not an oil, but on the bottom, underneath the bed, you have a roofed area. The bed is the roof, and the canopy coming down on the sides is considered like the mechitzos. So you're creating an oil there, and therefore it is asr. So in summary, we have these three categories of oil. We have the oil keva, a permanent structure which is a chiv chatas. We have the oil arai. One constructs a temporary roofed area, a tented area. It's also midrabanan, because although he's not fashioning this mokayim, he's not creating a roofed area, because it's merely something temporary, it's mobile, it's going to be moved. It is also midrabanan, because he is fashioning a protection, a roof, a tent. What are examples of this? The good, that leather pouch which he's opening up on top of the peg, he's spreading it out and creating a covered area. We have the mishameres, which according to Tosfos is because of oil arai. This is the strainer spread over the kli. We have the kila, the bed canopy, which the Gemara told us needs to have at least a gag of tefach. We have cases which there are mutal chatchil without any concern because he's not making any oil. What are examples of that? We have the mita v'kisei, a pre-constructed bed or chair, which is simply opening and placing in position. He's not fashioning any roof. He's not creating any tent. We have a case where he's being moisiv al oil arai. There's already a pre-existing temporary tent there. He's merely adding to it, in which case the Rabban does not prohibit. We have a case where the canopy, for instance, has a chut or meshicha, some type of strap attached to it, which indicates to us that this is meant to be open and closed. He's merely adding, he's adjusting a pre-existing oil arai. We have a case of a canopy which comes to a point and does not contain any gag, any flat roofed area which has a tefach wide. Therefore, it is not considered like an oil. And we have the V-line, the curtain, placed opposite along the doorway. So he's not creating any roofed area. He's simply doing something which is vertical, in which case there's no concern of oil whatsoever. Continues the Gemara. V'amar Rav Sheshes Breder Rav Iti. Hai si'ano shori. Si'an is a felt hat. One can wear this wide-brimmed felt hat on Shabbos. V'itmar, haven't we learned si'ano asr, that it's asr? Like Kash says the Gemara, let's resolve it as follows. Ha de is tefach, ha de les tefach. The halacha that a si'ana is also to be worn is if isbei tefach, it has a tefach. The brim is so wide, a tefach wide, in which case it's a concern of oil. He's making a roofed area. Ha de les tefach, our sheish is so loud. We're speaking about he has a narrow brim, which does not have a tefach, and therefore there's no concern of oil. Says the Gemara, if this is the case, that even wearing a garment, a hat, is creating an oil, if so, sharviv b'glima tefach. If one wraps his garment, his cloak around himself, and he leaves a tefach, a flat area beyond his head, hachanami di mechai, or hachanami de aser, would you say in this case as well, he's doing an oil and it's aser? Certainly not. It's just he's wearing his clothing. He's not creating any oil. He's not creating any roofed area. Says the Gemara, if so, we have to reinterpret that halacha. Elaloi kasha, apparently the way to resolve it is as follows. We have that contradiction regarding the si'ana. This felt hat may or may not be worn. It depends whether or not it is fastened tightly to one's head. If it's fastened tightly, there's no concern of any malacha. But if it's loose, it's not firmly attached to his head, firmly fastened, there's a concern that what? That on account of its width, of the brim, the wide brim, the wind might blow it off his head, and he might go ahead and grab it and walk with it 4 amas surabim. So the discussion here has nothing to do with oil, rather there's another concern of carrying surabim. Shalach le Rabbi Bar Cheskel, Rav Huna. So Rabbi Bar Cheskel sent a message to Rav Huna, Eimalon, please tell us, easy. Some say easy is a lashon of friend, our friend. Tell us, Hanach milim al yasa, those nice things, the Amr Slam Shmei de Rav, that you once told us the name of Rav. Remind us, send us the details of those things that you told us the name of Rav. 3 things. Try to be Shabbos, 2 concerning Shabbos, v'chada b'Torah, 1 concerning Torah. Shalchlei, so Rav Huna conformed and he sent back all the details. Ha the Sanya. So the first halacha regarding Shabbos in the name of Rav was pertaining to the following price. Ha the Sanya. Good bekisna mutar. This is the good, this leather container that we discussed earlier. So one may not spread it on Shabbos, but bekisna. What if it's already attached to its to the pegs there? Bekisna means it has its straps. So good bekisna means good with its straps, and it's already fastened in its place. Munach amakam kavor says Rashi, it's sitting in its regular place. In this case, mutal and toisa b'Shabbos. One may go and spread it on Shabbos. Why? Because he's merely adding, he's being moisiv an oil arai. He's not fashioning an oil arai anew, as we learned earlier, to add, to adjust a pre-existing temporary roof there. One can do that on Shabbos. So this halacha of good bekisna, mutal and toisa b'Shabbos, Amar Rav added a stipulation. Lo yishanu, this allowance is only elu bebeis b'nei adam. If two people are doing it, in which case they're not spreading it so well, so tightly, there's no concern. If one person is doing it on his own, in which case it requires more effort. In order to properly spread it, he's going to tie one corner to the peg there and then stretch the other side tight. He's going to really, really stretch this thing properly, in which case it appears like he's really forming a tent there. He's forming a roofed area. It looks like he's making oil arai. So one person on his own cannot do it. So this was the halacha of Rav. This was number one. Now Abaye adds, Amar Abaye v'kila, regarding a canopy, afilu b'yudnei adam also, even if 10 people erect that canopy, they can't do it. It's impossible that even a small area will not be properly stretched, and therefore it involves an oil arai. So these two cases are very similar. Stretching something properly, tightly, really well, and it appears, it resembles somebody who's actually forming an oil. He's making something. He's making a roofed area. He's making a tent. He's making a proper covering. Therefore, it resembles making an oil arai, and it's awesome. So this summarizes the first halacha of Rav, that stretching out that leather thing would be a problem. Iduch mai, what is the other halacha pertaining to Shabbos and name of Rav? The son is one to the brisa, kira, a stove shenishmata achas miryachoiseh, who one of its legs snapped off. Mutal taltal, he may go ahead and move around that kira. Certainly it's kalisha malachtel isser, it's intended for malacha. But as we learned, he can move it for under certain circumstances, if he needs it l'tzarech guf, if he needs to use it or needs a place, etc. So it's considered to be a kli. Shtayim asr, but if two legs broke off, in this case it's asr. Farshim explained that it loses its value, it can't be used any longer. Therefore, it's considered to be useless and completely muktzah. It's not even a kli. Rav Amar, afilu chad nami asr, even if only one leg broke off, it is also asr to move this kira around. Gzera shamayitka, there's a concern that he might be tempted to properly reattach that leg, which involves a malacha. What is the third saying in the name of Rav? Torah, regarding Torah, the Amar Rav asida Torah, shetishtakach meYisrael, in the future Torah will be forgotten from Klal Yisrael, shenemar, v'hifla Hashem es ma'koischa, Hashem will afflict Klal Yisrael with makos, which are described as v'hifla, something extraordinary. Ha'afla zu eini der ma'u. Not sure exactly what this refers to. When the pasuk says, I will add to be mafli to this nation, hafli a fella, something really extraordinary. And the pasuk there concludes that the chachma of the wisdom of the chachamim of Klal Yisrael will be lost. So apparently this lashon hafla is referring to losing Torah. Therefore I conclude hafla zu Torah. When the initial pasuk says "If Hashem es ma'koischa," it's referring to the makkah of loss of Torah. So in summary, we have three things in the name of Rav. The first thing was the good bekisna, this leather container. One person may not stretch it out on Shabbos. We have the kira, who lost even one of its legs. There's an isser to move it for concern of malacha, and asida Torah shetishtakach misrael. Continues the Gemara Tana Rabbanon. When our Rabbeim entered Kerem b'Yavne, so in Yavne there was this yeshiva, and it was described as a kerem because just as in a vineyard there are rows, they used to sit in rows. So when they came in there, they said, "Amru asida Torah shetishtakach misrael." In the future, Torah will be forgotten. Hashem says, days are coming. I will send forth a famine in the land. It won't be a famine for a hunger for bread, nor a thirst for water. The thirst and the hunger will be to learn to hear the word of Hashem. They will wander from sea to sea, from north to mizrach till east. They'll go on searching for the word of Hashem and they won't find it. Dvar Hashem means halacha. Dvar Hashem also means zehakates, to know the end of the Golus. Dvar Hashem is a nevuah prophecy. Rashi and Tosfos both bring psukim that allude to Dvar Hashem with reference to these things. Says the Gemara, what is an example, illustration of searching for the word of Hashem unsuccessfully? They said, Asida Isha Shetitol Kiko Shachuma. In the future, a woman will grasp a loaf of truma. She'll make her rounds to the shuls and the basement bate medrashes, leida, to verify im tayri, to know whether this loaf of bread is tamei or tar. Nobody will have the proper understanding and the ability to respond to her. Says the Gemara, that's her question. The question is whether this loaf of bread, which was found apparently in a oven, which contained something tummy in its airspace, so they're not going to know what the status of this bread is. Why not? There's a pasuk about it. Im ta'iri, im tmei, behedik sivbei. There's a clear pasuk that won't be forgotten. That's Torah shebechsav. The pasuk says, "Mikol oichel asher yachel." Any food is found in a oven, which is tummy. That food found in its airspace, in the airspace of the oven, receives tumah from the oven. So what's the question here? Ella, rather, the question will be, fine, the bread is tummy. What level of tumah does it acquire? Is it a rishon l'tumah, or merely a lower level, a sheni l'tumah? Ella leida im rishonahi v'im shniyahi v'ein mevin, and nobody will have the proper understanding to respond to her. Says Maharnami, this says, well, mas nisani. Seems to be a clear-cut halacha found in the Mishnah, because it's not as we learned in the Mishnah. Hasheretz shnim shebetaner. If a sheretz, for instance, a lizard, a dead lizard, which is metame, it's considered to be an avatuma, source of tuma. Shenimtza betaner, found suspended in the airspace of a tanner, of a earthenware oven. Now, a klicheres is unique because it can be mekabel tuma, can receive tuma even without direct contact, even if the tuma is merely found in its airspace. The tuma will transfer tuma to the tanner. So the tanner, the oven, becomes tummy, and as a result, anything found within the airspace of that tanner will also receive tuma from the tanner. So again, hasheretz, this creature which is shenimtza b'tanner, found suspended in the airspace of the tanner, hapasha b'seicha shniya, bread which is found in the airspace of this tanner, becomes a sheni l'tuma. Why? Sha'tanor tchila, because the oven is a rishon l'tuma. Why is the oven a rishon l'tuma? Because the lizard was an avatuma. He transferred his tuma to the oven, although he didn't actually directly touch the oven. But that's the halacha, that anything found within the airspace of the oven, of the klicheres, is as though it's tantamount to having actually touched the walls, the material, the chaymer of the wall of the oven. Therefore, the avatuma, the sheretz, which is avatuma, transfers tuma to the oven, makes it a rishon tuma, so it's one step lower, and that in turn transfers over to the food found inside the oven. It makes the tuma go over to that food as well, and makes that into a sheni l'tuma. So it's very clear. What's the question? The loaf of bread found inside the oven is a sheni l'tuma. Says the Gemara, but it's not really so clear, because one can go ahead and question this halacha and say, well, perhaps the kikar shel truma, the loaf of bread in this oven, is actually a rishon l'tuma. Why? How's that? Because there are really two ways of looking at this sheretz. How does it have the ability to transfer tuma to the tanner? Do we say the fact that we find that the Torah considers the tanner to be tummy, having received tuma from the sheretz, that indicates to us that it's as though the entire airspace of the tanner is full of tuma? How then does the lizard transfer its tuma indirectly to the wall of the tanner? Apparently, this whole airspace of the tanner is regarded as though it's one big lizard, one big tuma of lizard, and therefore the tuma can go over to the tanner, because as though it actually touched the tanner. Likewise, anything found in this airspace also receives direct tumah from the lizard. So this kikar shel truma in the airspace of the tanur is directly receiving tumah from the lizard. The lizard is an ava tumah. It gives over the tumah to the kikar, to the loaf of bread, making it a rishon. That's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is that it's not as though the entire airspace is full of lizards. It's not as though the tumah is spread throughout the entire avir of the klicheres. How then does the lizard transfer tumah to klicheres? The pasuk tells us it's a chiddush that something found in the airspace of a klicheres, in the usage area of the klicheres, is equated with having, as though it had touched the klicheres itself. It's a means of transferring tumah. It conducts the tumah. It's a mode of transfer from the lizard to the klicheres. So it's simply a way for the lizard to touch the klicheres without touching it. By being found in its airspace as though it touched it. It came into direct contact with the walls of the oven. But there's no reason to think that it's as though the entire airspace is full of the tumah of the lizard. It's simply a way to say that the lizard is touching the klicheres. Instead of directly touching it, it touched its avir. So that's as though it touched it directly. Now, the tumah needs to go to the klicheres. That's step number one. And phase two is the klicheres transfers its tumah that it received from the sheretz over to the kikar. So it's a two-phase process, thereby lowering the severity of the tumah, because the sheretz is an av, transfers tumah to the tanner, which becomes a rishon tumah. Then the tanner transfers tumah to the loaf of bread, making it a sheni tumah. So two ways to approach this halacha, which will result in two different results. Whether the kikar shel truma is a rishon tumah, we view it as though it actually came into contact with the lizard because the entire airspace is full of the lizard. Or do we say, no, it's simply the lizard has a way of touching the cheres through its aver, but it has to go to the cheres, and then the cheres transfers tumah to the kikar, resulting in merely a sheni l'tumah. So that's going to be the uncertainty, the lack of clarity that they're going to have in Klal Yisrael regarding the Torah, regarding this loaf of truma. She's going to know, is it a rishon or sheni? And nobody's going to have the clarity to respond. Explains the Gemara, Misapkalu. They will have the following suffix, Mistapkalu ha, the Amar later of Ada bar Aval Rava. So he asks Rava, why don't we treat Hai Tanura, this oven, Kimanda Mali Tuma, this oven which has a lizard inside it, why don't we view the entire tanur, entire airspace, as though it's filled with the tumah of the lizard, thereby resulting in the following, V'tehavi pas rishoina. So the loaf of bread found in this airspace together with that lizard, should result in becoming a rishon tumah because it received direct tumah from the lizard, who's an ava tumah. Why do we maintain that no, the kikar, the loaf of bread, is only a sheni l'tumah because it received tumah indirectly from the lizard? The lizard first transferred to the oven, then the oven transferred to the loaf of bread. Why don't we view the entire airspace as though it's filled with the tumah of the lizard, and the lizard is directly being metame the bread and making a rishon l'tumah? Amar Leisa, Rabbi responded, Lo Yamrin. We don't say Lichzaye, let's view Hai Tanura, this oven Kimai Demal Tumah, though it's filled with Tumah. Why? It brings him a raya from the following halacha. We know that a kli, a utensil, can only be Mekabel Tumah from Ava Tumah. It cannot be Mekabel Tumah from a Rishon Tumah. Now what happens if this oven has two things inside it? It has a sheretz, which is an Ava Tumah, and it also has an additional kli. Now this kli, is it going to be Tameh? It depends on whichever angle we adopt. If we say that the sheretz is as though he's filling the entire airspace with tumah of ava tumah, of sheretz, then the kli found in this airspace will also become tameh because it receives that tumah and can receive tumah from ava tumah. But if we maintain that the airspace is not full of tumah of the sheretz, rather the sheretz is merely transferring to the tanner, making the tanner into rishon tumah. Now the tanner, the oven, doesn't have the ability to transfer over tumah to the utensil found within it, because the utensil can only be mekabel tumah from an av. The oven is merely a rishon tumah, so the kli will remain tor. So depending on the outcome of this question of whether or not a kli found in this tanner with a sheretz is tameh, that will determine for us which approach is correct. And we happen to know that the kli will not become tumah. So apparently, we don't view the airspace as though it's filled with the sheretz. And therefore, regarding the question of the kikar shel truma, it will only be a sheni l'tumah because it receives tumah from the tanner. The Sani, as we found the Bryce, Yochol yu kol hakelim mitamin. Should we say that all kelim become tummy ba'ari klicheres in the airspace of klicheres tamaloi, but the pasuk says kol asher b'soicha yitma. Anything found in it becomes tummy. Mikol oichel asher yochel. So we learned only food oichel mashke mitamin ba'ari klicheres, because food and drink can become tummy from the cheres, which is the rishon latuma. But ve'ein kelim mitamin ba'ari klicheres. Kelim will not become tummy from this airspace. So apparently, the correct approach is that the airspace is not full of the lizard, the tumah of the sheretz. Rather, the sheretz transfers to the oven, and subsequently the oven transfers to its content. And therefore, it can only become metame, the food, but not a kli. And therefore, the kikar, which becomes tame on account of the cheres, will only be a shein l'tumah. Tanya, we learned in the Brayser, Shimrei Chai Omer, he disagrees. He says, Chas v'sholem shetishtakach Torah Yisrael, Chas v'sholem, to say that Torah will be forgotten from Klal Yisrael, Shneimar, Ki lo yisishakach b'zarei, Torah will not be forgotten. Ela mani mekayim, how do I fulfill the pasuk, Yishoytutu levakesh et v'Hashem, v'lo yinso, they will look around for where to Hashem will not find it, Shalim to halacha brura, u'mishnah brura makam echad. There won't be one place, one location where they will be able to find the halacha, without any disagreements. Without any machlekes, certainly the clarity in the halachas, they will retain. Okay, time for a brief review of today's daf. We learned that suspending a strainer above a kli is also midrabanan. Actually filtering through the strainer is a malacha min haTorah. This machlekes regarding which specific warning to give this person. Abai gave us 3 categories of making an oil on Shabbos. The permanent oil is chayav chatas. It's a malacha min haTorah. An oil arai, merely a temporary oil, is only also midrabanan. There are some times where it's mutal chatchila, repositioning a bed or a chair, adding to a temporary oil, or when there's a chut, a string there, and he's merely spreading the canopy, when there's no gag tefach, or merely hanging up a curtain in which there's no oil altogether. We learned about that wide-brimmed loose hat, where there's a concern it might fly off his head, he might carry in his rabbim. We learned 2 halachas in the name of Rav regarding Shabbos, and one regarding Torah being forgotten. The Gemara concluded with the Shimrei Chai, who says, Chas v'sholem, that Torah will ever be forgotten from Klal Yisrael.